Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining today's online webinar, which is Step Up Equality, Women's Leadership in Sport. This webinar is part of a series of sessions in the EU-funded project Step Up Equality, which is led by GIA, which is an Italian organisation, and supported by Fair Network, Assist, which is also based in Italy, Discover Football in Germany, Women Win, and AKS which is in Poland. The aim of Step Up Equality is to challenge gender discrimination in sport, both by empowering women to challenge gender norms and stereotypes when they encounter them, and also to increase the visibility of women in leadership roles, as well as encourage the exchanging of ideas and best practices between organisations and individuals to counter and challenge the very structures in sport which enable gender-based discrimination in the first place. We have a really exciting lineup of speakers today who are going to tackle all of these topics. They're going to address some of the practicalities of achieving change. So they'll look at the importance of building diversity into our understanding and implementation of feminism. They'll look at the value of partnerships and how we can encourage buy-in from different stakeholders in sport. And they'll also look at leadership on a governance level and what structural change is needed alongside increased representation. So these are really important topics, and they're really key to the long-term work of Fair Network and all the other project partners. So we're really excited to have everyone here today and thank all of you for joining today's session. We'd really like to encourage you to get as involved in this session as possible. So there is a Q&A button. Hopefully you can see it along the bottom of your screen on Zoom. Please put in any questions that you have for our speakers throughout the event, and we will aim to answer as many of them as possible. The only other thing to note is that this event is being recorded, so just bear that in mind. And yeah, I really hope you enjoy it. A huge thank you for joining and to all of our speakers. And I am now going to hand over to Ben Jacobs, who is going to be our moderator for today's event.
Thank you very much indeed, Esther, and a very good afternoon or good morning if you're in North, Central or South America. It's great to have your company. I'm disappointed from the word go that this session is being recorded because, as you can see, I've got some curtains that should never, ever be allowed to be part of any permanent recording. They're about as scandalous as the shirt that I'm wearing. So we can all have a good laugh at that and get off smiling. And hopefully over the course of the next 2 hours, we're going to have a really engaging debate. And as Esther mentioned, I encourage all of you to click on the Q&A button in the bottom right of your Zoom window. If you can't find that, some of you might have a slightly older version of Zoom, then feel free to use the chat as well. I will be across both of them, and I encourage you to give your opinions. Please also say the organisation from which you are from, so we get a sense of the kind of demographic that is listening in. I know we've got a global audience here, and we will try and make this as engaging as possible. We've got about 2 hours, and we've got a mix of keynote speeches and also panel discussions as well. And if we feel like we're overrunning or everyone just needs a little breather, we might take a break in the middle to go and get a cup of tea or coffee or take the dog out for a walk. Now, if you're comfortable, you can turn on your cameras so we can see your backgrounds and your lovely faces, and any pets as well are obviously welcome throughout the course of the next 2 hours. But similarly, our speakers are going to be spotlighted. So if you would like to just sit back and relax in the background and be a little bit more anonymous and use that Q&A button, then please feel free. You can also use the raise hand button to alert to a particular intervention, but we will try and keep most of the interactions to the Q&A just so we can keep to time. And I think Esther's given us a great summary to begin with. Of course, this session is about Step Up Equality and women's leadership in sport, and we'll be touching on a range of things. We'll start in a moment with a keynote speech from Amin, who's the chair of the EU high-level group on gender equality in sport, and there we're hoping to try and cover what that high-level group aims to do, the issues facing women in sport that group has noted as well, and the role of sport in achieving gender equality. And then after that, we get a bit more practical. We'll focus on how to get things done and building partnerships in particular. We'll look at intersectional feminism as well, and then maybe a cup of tea or so before we have an intervention from Piera Power, who's the executive director of the Fair Network, and then we finish off with a round table, which I'll come on to a little bit later. So I'd love to hear from you. Once again, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are listening from. And from my own perspective, it's a pleasure to be a part of this particular session, along with being a sports broadcaster with CBS. I'm also a founding member of the sports NGO Equal Playing Field, and that particular charity basically breaks world records in order to get media attention to try and promote gender equality in sport. So we played a world record football match, believe it or not, at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, and that was a lot of fun, but it also united a sports community to promote what is obviously a really important topic. And I can talk more about that as we progress, as one example of how you can do practical things to make progress in this particular field. But let's dive straight in with our opening keynote speech. As I say, it comes from Amin Bozkurt, who's the chair of the EU High-Level Group on Gender Equality and Sport. So Amin, I'm going to hand over to you for the next 15 minutes or so, and I'm really looking forward to this opening presentation.
Thank you very much, and I love your curtains, by the way. Let me start. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's nice to be with FAIR again, because FAIR has a special place in my heart. We go back a long time to 2005, when I started as a young member of European Parliament, the successful European Parliament's campaign against racism in football. And that was done in close cooperation with FAIR. I want to thank you for the kind invitation to speak about women's leadership in sport. And it's an honor to be in a panel which is dominantly consisting of women today. We will have in some minutes a closer look at the underrepresentation of women, which is already disproportionately affected by the pandemic crisis. And that is visible in different areas such as leadership, gender-based violence, media representation, or girls' participation in sport. If we look at COVID, it clearly postponed change or even caused steps backwards. But let me start first to introduce the EU High-Level Group on Gender Equality in Sport. Equality between women and men is a fundamental principle of the European Union since its establishment. The EU Gender Equality Strategy 2021-2025 promotes a union where women and men, girls and boys, in all their diversity, are free to pursue their chosen paths in life, have equal opportunities to thrive, and can equally participate and lead our European society. And of course, the same goes for sport. Female participation in sport and equal treatment at all levels are among the main priorities of the European Commission. Serious steps are already taken after the adoption of the previous report of the previous high-level group. The report is called Gender Equality in Sport, Proposal for Strategic Actions 2014 to 2020, but a lot remains to be done. The EU High-Level Group was launched by Commissioner Gabriel, and I thank her for her great leadership on gender equality in sport. The expert group will make proposals for future actions to the Commission, the Member States, and the sport movement in the field of gender equality in sport. Topics related to girls' and women's participation in sport, female coaches, women's representation in decision-making processes, media coverage, as well as gender-based violence are addressed. Concrete areas of action will be defined by the group, which consists of 15 experts, women and men, from a great variety of member states, from different walks of life, some coming from sport organizations, all with a common great dedication to gender equality in sport. Only by working well together, we can combat inequality in sport. Coming to the proposals, they would take the form of an action plan to be finalized end of this year. We started our work in February, and we are working on the different teams, looking at research, data, speaking with the sports world and other leaders. And it's a bit early to give away what the content will be of the report, but I don't give too much away if I say that a lot remains to be done. If we look in general, we need more speedy reforms, more sustainability, data and better data and monitoring and enabling environments. If the problem has been well identified, defined and integrated into speeches and sport policies, then concrete implementation must take place if we really want to have long-term results. We must accentuate its integration into transversal policies and particularly in the new initiatives that sport increasingly promotes. We need consolidation, continuity, and solid funding for data collection and monitoring. Now we need to keep up the effort to make sure the foundations are strong. We must continue to develop educational initiatives allowing us to have a holistic approach that must allow from an early age to have a culture of equality and inclusion for building safe environments. Education should help to tackle problems and create enabling environments. Sport, whether it's on a professional or amateur level, is much more than leisure or entertainment. Sport can empower people to push their own boundaries and to achieve personal goals beyond dreams. But for now, not everyone's dreams. We all know that women remain underrepresented at all levels of sport. Women are marginalized in the run for coaching positions. Women are practically absent in executive boards of sports organizations. Women are being paid less in general and rewarded much less for high performances. Women's sports leagues receive less coverage by media. Sport is about achieving, being the best, the fastest, competing with others or with yourself, to win, to get healthy, to socialize and have fun. Sport is the place where a winning mentality thrives the most. Interestingly, it underperforms when it comes to a winning mentality to combat inequalities. I have been working on the role of women in sport for quite some time now, and although years are passing by, we are still dealing with the same issues. Leadership and pushing for more speedy reforms are needed. We should use sport for social change. We have gathered here today because we know that for the benefit of sport and the positive effects of sport on society, we need much more women than there are currently present in all layers of sport organizations throughout Europe. Welcoming and inclusive sport organizations will serve all underrepresented groups. That's why intersectionality should be at the core of our work. And we should create a real home for all members of the sport family. Should we only strive for an increase of the numbers, or should we strive for sport organizations to reflect our societies that have become increasingly diverse through time? To be successful, we should strive for inclusion. You can open up your clubs and invite them in, but a house is not a home if they don't feel it as their home. Change won't stick. We need to find a way to use sport for social change. Altogether, we have to say that many initiatives have been taken in the EU to improve the situation and status of women in sport, but we are far from there yet. The EU is taking its responsibility towards women in sport and in society very seriously and is strongly supporting social change. But the time has come for sports organizations and sport governing bodies to show a winning mentality towards achieving gender equality. Who is opening the door to more participation, more diverse sport clubs? Many times that key could be in our own hands. We could pressure the key keepers. Leadership matters, not only to change the rules, but also to be the drivers of change when it comes to organizational culture. The significant underrepresentation of women and people of color in leadership positions has been found at all levels, from local clubs to international federations. The low number of women in leadership positions sharply contrasts with their increased sport participation. For instance, the European Institute for Gender Equality found that on average, only 14% of all top decision-making positions in European Union member states sports federations were occupied by women, ranging from 3% in Poland to 43% in Sweden. If we have a look at the data of the Eurobarometer 2018, we see while employment of women in sport is 45.5% of the total number of employees, the share of women in decision-making positions, guess what? If we look at the chairs of the national Olympic committees of EU member states, only 4, which are consisting of the countries Bulgaria, Ireland, Lithuania, and the Netherlands. Where are the others? When we look at executive heads, it's only 3, Germany, Spain, and Sweden. In general, members of the highest decision-making body in the EU 27 are consisting of 78.2% of men and 21.8% of women. Some countries show a reverse trend, which are the Netherlands and Sweden. If we have a look at the national sport federations, then it shows an even more concerning picture. Only 6.2% of chair positions are occupied by women in the EU 27. As members of decision-making bodies, 81.1% men and 19.9% women. Executive heads positions are 75.6% men, 24.4% women. The only exception here is Croatia, 50-50. Well done, Croatia. How is the football family doing? FAIR is right now doing research in 14 European countries. And Piara Power allowed me to give a sneak preview on one data, but that data is also very shocking. If we look in senior governance position in European football, and that includes elite level prof clubs, national leagues associations, national federations, and UEFA, then we're looking at 89.2% white men, 7.6% white women, and this is not an error, 0.3% ethnic minority women. It's awful to see those data. We love to talk about the football family, but the family with fathers, brothers, uncles, sons, or nephews is actually an odd family. I called it at another conference a dysfunctional family, consisting almost entirely of male members, and it is still a man's world. The reason that we know the names of women chairing executive sport boards in the EU 27 is that we can count them on one hand. This is exactly why sport governing bodies need to show leadership and sincere dedication to creating a balanced gender representation throughout their organizations. This attitude is leading to a vicious circle where fewer women are practicing sports and not enough qualified professional sportswomen are present to flow through to coaching and executive positions. Consequently, there are not enough women present in leading positions in sport organizations. So there is not enough attention, promotion, nor encouragement for other women to pursue careers in sports. If we want the sport world to take leadership on gender equality, the leadership should reflect the change we want to see in gender equality. We need at least 30% representation at all levels, including grassroots, but we should of course strive for more, and 50-50 seems fair to me. So let's work together on social change to respond to the current environment. This can only be done if we cooperate with national governments, sports organizations, women's organizations, the media, and participants to ensure that women in sport get the recognition they deserve. We need sport to lead the way. We need role models for our youth and our societies. So when there is only diversity in the field, but not in the boardrooms or in managerial and coaching positions, we should act. I sincerely hope that we will be able to discuss the foundations for change, inspiring, sustainable, and speedy change. I hope that I gave some inspiration for a fruitful discussion. We are going to do our part with the EU high-level group on gender equality in sport, and I really look forward to hear about your commitment, good practices, and above all, your priorities. We have all this knowledge and experience here in the virtual room. Let's make good use of it. Together we can succeed. Let's make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, really good way to kick off this discussion. And if you've got any comments, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We'll come on to them throughout the course of the next 65 minutes or so as we move on to our next session in just a moment. A quick question though from me. I mean, naturally your focus is on leadership. And if we're talking about gender equality, then from a leadership perspective, the diversification of the boardroom, let's say, that's change from the top down. But you mentioned right at the end how important grassroots was as well. And that would be change, if you like, from the bottom up. So can you just elaborate from the EU's perspective about how we can facilitate gender equality from the bottom up, not just from the top down?
One thing is, of course, implementation, because it's not that we are going to come up with all new recommendations. A lot of the recommendations are already there. And if we only are looking at the top down, that's not going to work. It has to come, like I said, from bottom up. And we have to work on education, absolutely, and change the culture, because it already starts if there are not enough role models. Then for girls, it's more difficult to imagine themselves as in a position as coach or even as a manager, as a leader in the sports club. So we need role models, we need more education, but we also need maybe more attention to good governance, because what you see in a lot of sport clubs, but also local sport clubs, is that those chairs are very comfortable. So when men are sitting in those chairs, they are not leaving them. And sometimes it's maybe needed to maximize the term of in boards, for instance, or the situation, create a more balanced situation for people to do volunteering work, because women are lacking behind in all areas, in voluntary work, in sports participation, in leadership positions. So we really need to show leadership, and that's what I meant. If you want to change it, you should act in order to change the situation. So you are also yourself the driver of leadership. So you should pressure for change. So good governance, but also better procedures, and see where you can engage women to really make the changes in sport clubs, because it all starts at the grassroots level.
And just finally, I mean, the end goal of gender equality is obviously the same, but it's more complex than that. And if we look at the EU, specific regions and sports will need completely different strategies. Sometimes it's about providing opportunity, other times education. Sometimes there are cultural barriers, and respect is one of the problems that you have to combat. Some sports and federations within women's sport require more funding. And then, of course, naturally, you have the strategy for grassroots right up to the elite. And at the elite level, there'll be discussions around things like equal pay and marketing budgets and opportunities and so on. So how, when you're as big and as broad as the EU, do you ensure that all of the different countries and regions and sports and leagues and federations are catered to, when each one probably does have a slightly different strategy to get us somewhere closer to gender equality?
That's easier said than done. But the assignment for our group is to come up with recommendations to the European Commission, to the member states, so that's the national level, and to the sports world. And ideally, they should work together. You should look where you can find a good policy agenda, where you can strengthen each other in your efforts to have more gender equality. So we absolutely need, on the global, but also on the local level, more data and monitoring. That's really important, because how can you solve a problem if you don't know the extent of the problem? The European Commission, of course, is facilitating already a lot of important actions. But how can you strengthen it? By working or cooperating maybe with the agendas of the member states. The member states have a task more towards their own country, but you should strengthen. Not everybody in his own silo should invent the wheel. You should really work better together to have a maximum result. And also, of course, the International Sports Federation, the sports family, they can play a role as well. To give an example, for instance, if you give public funding is done with taxpayers' money. When your laws in your country are in favor of equality, you can maybe make some criteria out of equality if you are spending taxpayers' money, because women are paying tax as well. So the system should be more fair and more open. And like I said, you should work on creating enabling environments to push forward with your reforms.
And I will just ask one question from the floor. I appreciate we've overrun already by about 5 minutes. It's mostly my fault for rambling on at the beginning about my horrific curtains, but I think it's important that we hear feedback from our attendees. And Brenda Elsie has written to us via the chat and said, how is the EU envisioning their role globally, i.e. their relationship with the Americas, Africa, and so on? Are you partnering with parallel organizations over there?
That's less a question for me to answer, but we will have later in the program a colleague from the European Commission, Violetta. She will be in the roundtable, I think, in the last part of the. I think it's better to direct the question to her to see what the Commission is doing practically. I know that from my own experience when I was a member of European Parliament, that the EU was having a lot of contacts and coordination via other policies, but I don't know in the sport policy, but sport is on the agenda. And it's good, for instance, in our own sessions, we are also looking not only in the EU, but we are also looking at the more global aspect. For instance, yesterday we had a meeting of our high-level group, and there we spoke with a professor from Canada to see what their experiences and recommendations are on the issue of gender-related violence, for instance. So, for having the best results, we should gather our information and the experience from everywhere, also globally.
Great stuff. I mean, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating presentation, and really enjoyed the chat afterwards as well. Stay with us. I've got other questions to put to you over the course of the next hour and a bit. Zara, thanks for getting in touch on the chat as well. I'll come to your question in due course, but let's move on to our next session now, just so we don't spectacularly overrun right off the bat, and we will try and wrestle back a little bit of time. But having set things up, we're going to talk a bit more practically now, how you can actually get things done. And our next focus is on building partnerships. And we're going to look at a case study from the brilliant Women in Football organization. The presentation in a moment is about their #GetOnside campaign. They've also done another one a few years back called What If, which had a lot of, again, practical results and brought on partners to get us a whole lot closer to gender equality in sport. After the presentation from Women in Football, we'll have about 5 minutes for a Q&A. So again, please put your comments in the Q&A. That's in the bottom right of your Zoom screen. If you can't see that, then just stick them in the chat, and please do say your name and also the organization that you represent. But I'm delighted to be joined by Michelle Dorgan from Women in Football, who is now going to take us through their Get Onside campaign. Michelle, congratulations on all the great work that you and Women in Football do. A very good afternoon. Really looking forward to hearing more about the Get Onside campaign, and it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Cheers for that. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to presenting to you a little bit more about Get Onside. So without further ado, I will now share my screen because I have a little PowerPoint to hopefully not death by PowerPoint. And I will talk you through a little bit about Women in Football. So what I thought I'd do, I take it you can all see, actually, bear with me a second. I've just realized I have not shared that with the volume, which we will need for later. So bear with me. There we go. So can everyone see my screen okay? Getting a nod, I think that's great, brilliant. So what I thought I'd do is just very briefly give you a quick intro to Women in Football, because I realise that a number of you may not know very much about us, you may not know who we are. So I thought I would start by giving you a quick overview as to who we are. So to begin with, we are a network of over 5,000 women, men, and non-binary people who are dedicated to driving football forward. And we are very much about transforming the industry for the better. So this webinar is very much in our lines. This is very much very important to what we do. We are focused on empowering our members. We talk about empowering them with knowledge, expertise, and collective support. And collective support is key to what we do. It's a key foundation stone to who we are and how we make sure that we are actually developing future leaders where hopefully gender discrimination doesn't exist. That is the objective. So in terms of what we do, we have 3 key pillars that we work around. The first is celebrate achievement. I think most of us on this call will know there's a lot of women involved in sport and there's a lot of women involved in football, but actually we don't shout about it enough. So our role at Women in Football is to celebrate the achievement of as many of these women as possible and let the world know how important women are to the industry. The second pillar we focus around is on challenging discrimination. We know there's a lot of discrimination in the game, unfortunately, and for various personal characteristics that it is based on. Gender discrimination can often be missed or forgotten, and our role is to make sure that those women who do suffer discrimination because of their gender are actually being supported and they are being recognised and they know there is somewhere they can turn. So that is where we exist. So we can stand up for those women and we can try and change this. The third pillar of what we stand for is about sharing expertise. We are very much here to develop the next generation of women in football and the next generation of female leaders within the game. So within our network, we have a phenomenal breadth of experience and knowledge. And what we want to do is make use of that and actually share that knowledge. So that is key to what we do. I thought I'd include a very few top highlights from the past year or so. We have many, many more, but we don't have long enough to go through them all. So just a few top line ones. First of all, we launched our new brand. Launching our new brand in October last year was kind of a key stepping stone to show that actually we are moving on. We are moving into a new pace now at Women in Football. Alongside that, we've obviously had COVID and lockdown. So a key part about what we do is actually our networking. And as mentioned at the start, we will be talking about partnerships and the importance of building partnerships within football and sport in general. And our networking events have been key to this because women working in the game often struggle to meet other women working within the game. So our networking events allow women to come together with others. But during lockdown, they had to move online. So we didn't want them to stop. And we're very proud to say that actually during lockdown, we have now delivered 25 online webinars and 27 round tables to allow that really close-up networking opportunity. We've also launched our WIF corporate membership. So we are all about our members, that's why we exist. But we discovered as we've been moving along that there are a lot of organisations out there who want to change where they're at, who want to really make a difference and want to be and are supportive of the women in their network, but they weren't quite sure how to move that forward. So we developed our corporate membership and we are delighted to say that Brighton were our first corporate members to join when we launched earlier this year. And we have recently announced new members being Sky Sports, the Premier League and the PLCF, Premier League Charitable Fund as well, who again, fantastic for us and great to be able to work with them and support them to move forward and improve their organisation and their setup. We also kicked off our inaugural mentoring program. So again, empowering our members, helping to move them forward from a leadership and development perspective is key to us. And our leadership course, which you can see there on the right-hand side, is a key part of what we do. And it's been very successful. But we kicked off our mentoring program as a support element to work alongside that. So those are a few of the key highlights. But talking about the leadership course, we also moved that online during lockdown, inevitably. And these are just a few highlights of this. I think we've been really pleased with what we're doing with this. The feedback's been phenomenal. 100% of our attendees over the past few years have said they would recommend it, either very likely or extremely likely, and also that they will use what they've learned. And again, the feedback we get is phenomenal and it sells out every time. We actually have another leadership course coming up soon. So if anyone is interested, please do get in touch because we do have a few places left at the moment. But moving on from that, in addition to the leadership course, we're very fortunate to have a fantastic partner in Barclays. They are our lead partner. They support us with the leadership course, and they have also supported us through the creation of a bursary scheme. This bursary scheme is to fund places for women from underrepresented communities to take part and participate in our leadership course. Again, that is part of our contribution and our support to our network to really make a difference to all those women who need that support and to help develop a diverse future. And we all know that diverse leadership teams are more profitable, so it's good for business. These are just a few other things that we do, but I will skip through those for now. That brings us to where we are now and the topic of this presentation. So, as you see there, I think we all agree it's time for change, and it is definitely time for the industry to get on side with women in football. Women are a key part of the football industry and a key part of the sports industry. So in terms of where our Get On Side campaign originated from, Ben mentioned at the start about our What If campaign, which we launched in 2018. We were blown away by the success we had with that. The idea of it was to ask the industry to get involved and make a pledge in support of women in football. And the pledges we received were phenomenal from the likes of Sky Sports, UEFA, the FA, and also from individuals like Emma Hayes, who very kindly offered to run a day where she was shadowed by a number of female coaches. So following on from the success of that, we wanted to take it to another level. So this year we came back with a brand new voice, a brand new identity, in a bid to drive more change than we've ever driven before. And I'm happy to say, Get On Side worked. So we only launched this last month, well, September. You'll see there Sian Massey-Ellis, who is a fantastic Women in Football member and ambassador. She's very supportive of what we do. And she seemed the right person alongside JJ Robley as well to feature in our campaign. In terms of a little bit of background to Get On Side, we launched it in September. And again, the idea was it was to build on the What If campaign, and it was to be a rallying cry for the industry to come together, to really promote gender equality. And again, to deliver meaningful progress, to really make a difference. And again, delighted to say it has worked. The feedback has far surpassed, and the number of pledges has far surpassed those we received from What If, which we didn't think would be possible. But yeah, in terms of what Get Inside is about, to be on side means you are actively helping to bring about a permanent and positive change towards gender equality in football. And this is what the pledgers who have made various commitments to gender equality and to support women in football have done. And as you can see from this slide here, there are a number of big names who have signed up and have made pledges towards paid internships, to ambassadorial roles, to support, to events, etc. A few of those pledges you can see on here. Again, it covers the world of football, from Premier League football clubs to football associations, including the FA, Scottish FA, Welsh FA, other stakeholders within the game, and sports media. So again, the support has been phenomenal, which shows everyone gets that change is needed, and everyone, or most people, are committed to seeing that happen and to doing what they can to support it. By way of a few quick numbers, we've had over 120 pledges to date. That number keeps growing day by day. What we were really pleased to see is that our Get On Side hashtag was the second most used hashtag by MPs on launch day, which is quite a nice one to be able to shout about. And what I'd like to do is just very briefly, before I finish, share our Get On Side video with you. So this is just a minute long, so shouldn't be too long, but I'm hoping when I press play, you guys should all be able to hear it as well. We will find out.
To be on side is to be on the side of change.
The side that thinks to the future.
Are you ready?
I belong in football.
We are stronger together.
One team, one vision.
Support everyone's right to thrive.
Step up.
Make a change.
It's the side that believes in equality.
It's not men's football,
It's not women's football.
It's just football.
Get on side.
Okay, so hopefully everyone heard that and the volume worked, I hope. The joys of technology, never quite sure. And then just to bring this to a close, just a quick summary really of what we've done so far with the campaign. I think it's really seemed to have resonated with both the general public and industry leaders and key stakeholders within the game. The number of pledges we've received, as I said, has been fantastic. And the number of requests and contact we've had from organisations and individuals wanting to ask how they can get involved, how they can make a difference. Social media has been brilliant for us. This has really helped us get that message out there and help drive visibility. Now where we're at is focusing on driving it forwards and how we can really sustain this momentum and keep focusing forwards. And this is a long-term campaign. We know there's more to be done. We have a few key milestones coming up next year, including a Get On Side Awareness Style Weekend and a Career Development Day, soon to be announced. But that pretty much brings me to the end of the presentation. So on that note, I will stop sharing. You can see at the bottom there, that is my email address. If anyone would like to get in touch with me, please do drop me an email. It's very simple, michelle@womeninfootball.co.uk. I will just stop sharing and I will hand back over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much indeed, Michelle. That was fascinating. Love the video. I think me and Hope Powell have exactly the same glasses, as pure coincidence. I'm interested, following on from what you said about your thoughts specifically on women's football. As you say, the whole point of the messaging is it's not women's football, it's not men's football, it's just football. But if you actually break down football currently from the different sexes, you see a lot to like in the women's game that the men's game can learn from. It's more inclusive, it's more athlete-led, it's more accessible, it's more authentic. There's a lot to work with, whereas the men's elite game in certain parts is ultimately broke, full of overspending and rife at times with corruption. So is it fair to say that the whole point of gender equality is not just about having a seat at elite level, let's say European football? It's about shaping the future of the game at all levels. And when you think about how to shape the future, some of that model can be found better in women's football currently than men's football.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, we can learn from all areas of football, whether it's from the men's game or the women's game. The key thing about women in football is that actually we represent women who work in the men's and the women's game. And those women move from one to another. Now, fortunately, there are more opportunities to work in the women's game as well. But in terms of learning from it, yeah, there are certainly a lot of positives from the women's game. It's more family oriented as well. It is, as you say, more accessible. People who do start to go to it, they're seeing a higher level of football as well. And they're starting to appreciate, actually, maybe I do like women's football, which is brilliant. But again, there's still things we can learn from the men's football, both what to do and what not to do. But I think overall, what's really nice to see, if we can get more women working in both the men's and the women's game, who can learn from all those around them and who can teach those around them. And I think that's what's important. And I think earlier when we were talking to Amin, when she was saying about the importance of having female leaders, that's what's key. If we can get female leaders and drive diversity at the top of football, hopefully that can help throughout the game. But I think in terms of our membership, our members are throughout the industry. So we have members who are coaching at grassroots level, who are female members. We have members who are playing. We have members who are in management and director positions across the game and work as CEOs. And that's what's nice to see. We are seeing change, but definitely we can all learn from someone as long as we're listening.
And if we look at the kind of entry point for somebody perhaps that's either a little bit younger or newer to the industry, wanting to break into it, what do you think some of the barriers or challenges are stopping more women either coming into the football sector or staying in the football sector?
I think that there's naturally a few barriers, as there are to any industry. Some of them are gender-based, some aren't. It can be from any different area, but what we're trying to do is actually try and break down some of those barriers. So through the Get On Side campaign, we have a number of people making pledges, so mentoring pledges. So those pledges are actually saying, do you know what, if there's people out there who want to break into, for example, Jackie Oatley, who's one of our ambassadors, said she's willing to mentor someone who wants to get into broadcasting. So what we're trying to do is break down those barriers. So the girls who think it's not for me, the boys are going to get, the guys are going to get the jobs. Actually, that's not true. So by us making more women visible, we're hopefully showing that those role models do exist. So that breaks down that barrier. And then by working with our Get On Side campaign, all the pledges that people are making, that organizations are making, we share them on our website. So again, hopefully it's making it visible that there is lots of support out there and there's lots of opportunities. But I think those who aren't sure, we also have partners at Women in Football, educational academic partners who, for example, at University of Liverpool, they offer a scholarship, UCFB, they offer a scholarship, and it's for women wanting to further their education with a focus on football or sport. And that is where we're able to act as kind of that middle person to help connect those organizations and to try and fight against those barriers and let people know that we can break them down, and football is a real career opportunity for everyone, irrespective of your background.
And you mentioned with Get On Side that it was the second most used hashtag by MPs, which is obviously fantastic. And MPs like Tracy Crouch have always been big supporters of the football industry. There's even an MPs team too, and we crossed paths with them when we broke a world record at the FIFA Women's World Cup when I was with Equal Playing Field. And social media can work both ways, can't it, as far as gender equality? On the one hand, you can promote a campaign, you can unite with a network, you can whistleblow, you can call out abuse. Lewis's men's team, for example, have just launched a campaign called Call Him Out, and that's focused on social media about calling out misogyny. But at the other end, you can get instances where women, anyone, of course, also of both sexes, are abused on social media. Karen Carney was one example of that, where Leeds got sucked into almost belittling her perfectly valid opinion as a pundit, and it forced her off social media. So as far as gender equality is concerned in the context of women in football, what role do you think social media and digital platforms have to play?
A huge one. And that is why we were one of the stakeholders who were involved in the social media boycott that took place alongside the FA, the Premier League, the EFL, and the other stakeholders. And again, it's to make sure that actually this discrimination that is gender-based, it's not being forgotten, and that we are calling it out. And what Lewis are doing is brilliant. And again, I mean, Lewis FC are a phenomenal club anyway with what they do with Equality FC and how they're promoting that side of it. But we work very closely at Women in Football with the social media platforms. So we are regularly having meetings with other key stakeholders in the game and in women's sport as well, in the women's industry, to try and discuss what needs to be done, but also to feed back and say when enough isn't being done and to make recommendations. And it's slow. We know there's an interest to make a difference, but obviously it's challenging for those platforms. But change needs to happen because women are experiencing discrimination that's not acceptable. It shouldn't happen. As you say with Karen Carney, that shouldn't have happened. It does, but what can be done to make a difference? And that's why we're here now. And that's why we play that role, to try and make sure we are communicating with the powers that be, to try and say, like, what are you doing? What change is really happening? And to push back when enough isn't happening or it's not happening quick enough.
Michelle, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating stuff, and keep up the good work as well. If it's okay with you, I'm sure a lot of our attendees would like this. Would you be fine to share the presentation with our panelists if they so wish, so they can have a proper read of it, particularly that pledge page, which obviously says the practical side of things? I'm sure that's okay, isn't it, if anyone wants the presentation?
Of course, no problem at all.
Great stuff. Thank you, Michelle. And once again, Women in Football, keep up the good work. You can join Women in Football as well if you haven't already done so. Just take a look at the chat for all of the details. It's womeninfootball.co.uk/join-us. And the link to that, as I say, is in the chat. And make sure you check out specifically Get On Side. And if you're amplifying that or pledging towards that, you can use the hashtag on social media, Get On Side. So we're 2 sessions in, we're going to do one more, and then we'll make a collective call, probably doing a virtual vote on Zoom for a bit of fun, using the raised hand if people would like toilet and tea breaks before we return. But let's go straight on now to another really important and fascinating topic. And the title of our next session is called The Importance of Intersectional Feminism. And we've got Haifa Talili, who is a sociologist and researcher to present to us, and she'll be looking at the role of women in sport from, as the title suggests, a sociological perspective. Haifa's work in particular is to empower hijabis to lead their own campaigns. So Haifa, thank you for joining us. This is a really important topic. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to share this experience. I'm doing an action research mobilization with a very stigmatized population, hijabis in France, and especially hijabis who want to play football. It was not natural for me. I'm a researcher doing action research because I really feel that this is where I have to be, to really not only write articles and just stay in my laboratory, but really connected with the population discriminated. And maybe because I'm a former educator in sport, it's very important to listen, to give voices, to be efficient, and also to be connected with the actors, sports actors. And this is, the core of the subject. It's not really the subject of Islamophobia in sport. It's the problem of the representation and the misunderstanding of representation of different population. And that's why it's in connection with intersectional reflection. But let's start with the FFF point of view. I don't know if you are familiar with the Hijab Ban in France, but when we spoke about the Hijab Ban, we have to refer to the law. And in 2012, the IFAB, International Football Association Board, and also the FIFA incorporate the possibility of wearing the hijab, the headscarf, or the turban in the rules of soccer. But the FFF in 2014 used the argument of secularism to maintain prohibition of wearing any religious or denominational signs because for them, open the quotes, a soccer field, a stadium, a gymnasium, a dojo are not places of political or religious expression. They are places of neutrality. But secularism does not impose a duty of neutrality of on players. And it's the respect of the regulatory dress as well as the consideration of hygiene and safety that prevail. Signs or clothing that ostensibly show a religious affiliation are prohibited. However, accessories such as bandanas, hats or headgear, which can be worn for different reasons, can be worn if they are not accompanied by any proselytizing and if they are comply with safety and hygiene rules. You see the confusing references. We know that the secularism is something very strong in France, and we are really proud of this law, but secularism authorizes any individual with different religious or not, or maybe they can change religious reference, but secularism authorizes citizens to really be part of the society. But for the question of the representative of the state, of course, the representative of the state have to be neutral, have to be don't have to show the religious aspect. But the ostensibly and proselyting, it's tricky because when you show the religious, of course, it's visible, but it's not proselytism. You're not forcing any person to change their religious. And this is, it's tricky, but we need help to understand these differences because it's in the core of the understanding of secularism. But it's because of the confused understanding that pushed me to work on this subject. And I really thank to Fair Network because they were really the starting point. In 2019, I was at the Diversity House in parallel of the World Cup in Paris, and I just asked to do a panel around this subject, and just to open the box and just invite specialists and ask them if this is allowed or not, if we need clarification. And of course it's discrimination. It's totally discriminate and the Muslims women. But now the work that I'm doing is to really open the box, see the representation, listen to, of course, the women concerned by the invisibilization, the dehumanization, but also to give the voice to the actors, not only coaches, but also club leaders and referees, because they see the women and they see that they are not, I don't know how to use radical terrorists. They are just, women who want to play and with their identity. That was interesting to also to have this sisterhood, not only with Fair Network, but also with Women Win, and also, all the important actors in France, and especially the LGBTQE+ association in football. They understand what is invisibility in football. They understand also the dignity to respect on their identity, their sexuality, but their presence in the society. And that's how we start to work with, but we don't know exactly how can we change the situation. And as a researcher doing action research, I'm just speak and ask to girls that are concerned, what does it mean, their reality on the pitch, but also outside of the pitch with their family, and to see the paradoxical situation, difficulties, and also to ask the same question to the actors and to see if they understand the arguments. And at the end, I hope that we can find some recommendation and guides for really helping the FFF to understand this emergent population. It's not because it's new that it's bad. It's not because we see more and more hijabis in the society that it's a bad evolution. It's just because they know their rights. They know that they have the possibility to wear the hijab, and if it's important for them, why they have to take off the hijab. And that's a journey. It's really a journey with, by, and for hijabis, with people really concentrate around the law issues, the discrimination issues, and also to enter to in the understanding of what is fighting discrimination, inclusion, respect of the diversity, strong words, strong concept, but concretely, how can we, change positively things on the field? I want to just to share with you a kind of abstract of the campaign, because of course I'm a researcher, but the campaign is a global. It's not only we have the hijabers really involved in the field, but we have also community organizer who teach them, help them to be more and better mobilized on the field. And and we have also the help of different actors around us to understand the law issues, like lawyer or activist, and to be more precise on our recommendations. Just to share with you that you will understand concretely what is my work. Do you see it? or not? Maybe not.
Not yet.
Let me just, yeah. This is the process of the research action. I started with interviews, individual and collective, with girls themselves, but also coaches, referees, and leaders, even at the FFF, to understand their representation, their misunderstanding, maybe the errors of the understanding of what is this fighting discrimination, what is secularism. And but the main objective is to liberate the speech, to listen to the voice of the concerned, and to also push them to stimulate their reflection. Because if you are discriminate, and especially in France now, there is no surprise. It's always in connection with the presidential election. We are in presidential election, and in that point, hijab is always used as the problem of the society. And imagine if you are hijabi, open the television, always see all the discrimination. It's really violent. But when you are open the speech and liberate the speech, you want to understand what is the problem, and they really want to learn from the law. And that's pushed them to the mobilization, the second part. They really want to be, active, to be with their sister, but, to be really on the beach, outside on the beach, and also provoke some non-violent actions. We create also tête-à-tête, head, how do you say, head on head, is it that? Tête-à-tête. We invite very important leaders in law, but also sociological, pedagogical, psychological, and also activists to really understand the issues, to have inspiration, and also to provoke a change in terms of lobbying. That's where I am now. I am now analyzing all the interviews, but the next step is to provoke a discussion, a collective discussion, the number 4, with hijabers and also leaders. And you can imagine at the end, with all the recommendation, to fill the gap of misunderstanding, we can, co-create knowledge, of course, leadership. And you see, the process, the positive process. Yeah, and the goal is to change the public opinion, and to be more sensitive on that subject. As and of course, maybe not soon, not too pas trop tard, not too. We hope that in few months we can provoke and change in the regulation inside the FFF. It's not a difficult objective, I think. It's easy when all the people start to open eyes and see the reality of this population, and just change their prejudices, and just to be more kind with this population, sportive, active, football player population. I think it's okay if you said that we have only 10 minutes. Maybe if you have any question around that, or maybe others' question to understand the campaign, the collective campaign, I can answer to your question.
Thank you, Haifa, much appreciated. I think starting with a simple question, and if I'm speaking too fast, then scream and shout French, and I will try and translate it for you. But it is important to understand, isn't it, that to many, if not all hijabis, wearing the hijab is a powerful statement. It's an empowering item of clothing.
That's a really, you're not French. You're not living in French. It's an essential question. Because for people here in France, not really connected with Muslims community, they see the hijab as an aggression, like, they want to impose their religion. And this is for them anti-Republican. But in reality, when you really spoke with hijabis, I don't want to say all the hijabis, but the hijabi that I, speaking with in sports, in football, they really use the hijab as a powerful tool to be connected, to be in the society, and to be themselves. And of course, there is others understanding, like, it's also to be seen as a Muslim and to be connected in the community of Muslim. But it's not only the only reasons. They're also an active tool to be connected inside with citizens and others in the society.
And at the other extreme, and this may be in France, but it's certainly the case in the Middle East, when Equal Playing Field, the sports NGO I mentioned earlier, went to Jordan. We found this in conservative communities. What about those who don't want to wear the hijab when they're playing sport, but perhaps they feel pressured culturally to do so by their families? How do we make sure that more conservative Muslim communities allow their daughters to play sport, whatever they choose to wear?
It's the intersectional analyze. Of course, all the women, you speak about, I don't know, a white woman. Is it the white woman is the same in any country? You have different culture, different point of view, different references. And also woman, woman, it's not a rigid, a block of identity. It's moving, it's complex. It's, it's always hybrid, you can be surprised by the complexity of the woman. And it's exactly the same with Muslim. Of course, if you are kind and you take, you want to question any woman in any country, to respect them, you ask them what is important for them. What is important, to wear the hijab or not wearing the hijab? That's the first question. Why it's important for you to wear the hijab? Why it's important for you to not wearing the hijab? If it's their choice, you have to respect it. This is the rule, to respect what is important for them, to be active, to live, and to be active in sport. And for me, it's the same issue. Of course, you have extremism in any country, in any population. And of course, we have to be aware about this type of influence. But now we are speaking about women who want to do and practice sports. You have to respect their will and their values and principles. It's important.
Great stuff, Haifa. Thank you very much indeed. That was really interesting. I'm sure if anyone wants to pick up on your presentation, you'll be happy to share your slides as well. And by the way, I can tell you're a researcher by the impressive amount of books that you have behind you as well. You've definitely got the best background of the lot so far. But for now, many thanks. And if you have questions for Haifa, feel free also to DM her or put some of your comments into the chat as well. I know that Michelle and Amin have been answering some of your questions in the chat. And when we're in the live sessions, go to the Q&A, that's in the bottom right of your Zoom screen, and you can put your questions there. Now, I know I promised you earlier that we might put a tea break to the vote, but naturally we've run over already. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to run off now whilst we start our next session. Make yourself a cup of tea very quickly and come back, take the dog for a quick walk, say hello to your kids or whatever you have to do, and then come back. But we are going to run straight through, and that is because we want to try and get you out of here as close to on time as we possibly can. So our next session is going to be from Alice Bruni from GIA in Italy. And this is another presentation, and we're going to be looking at some of the project findings specific to the Step Up Equality project. So Alice, I'm going to hand it straight over to you, and then after that we'll hear from Piera Power before we go to our final roundtable discussion. But Alice, a very good afternoon, and I'm looking forward to the latest presentation on the Step Up Equality project.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, and thanks everybody. Thanks, Piera, for organizing this. Yeah, I'm Alice, and I represent GEA, which is a social organization that is leading this project, which is a new European Union funding project under the Erasmus Plus Sport project. Well, originally we brought and thought the project, but the original coordinator was Girls in Sport from Sweden, which I also want to thank. They had to withdraw from the project for COVID-19 backlashes, but I really want to thank them to start this project. And well, the project, why Step Up Equality? The answer is pretty easy. We are based in Italy, and also connecting to what Emin said before. We had a look on the leadership in sport in Italy, and we have 45 federations, sport national federation, and out of 45 national federation, we have 1 woman, 1 president. So answering to the question before, where are the other countries? Italy certainly is not there, but we found out that we are in good company. In many countries, this data are very common. So Step Up Equality basically would like to analyze and bring together women in sports to really have a look into the problem of leadership. So we really, we have massive participation of women in sports, football, but not only. So the access it's been kind of advancing in the access to sport, but at the same time, the access to leadership seems to be blocked. So what have we done basically through these 3 years of project? Now this is the last year, and the project has been a bit unlucky because it went through the pandemic. So a lot of on the field activities have to be somehow rethought. But anyway, we found a lot of participation in this topic of leadership. We address mainly athletes, so young women athletes on one side, and we address the leaders on the other side, which were both women and men, coaches and sport managers, directors, to really have a thought together. What can we do to really step up on leadership? So we know that there is a problem of leadership. We all know it's been said, and it's now very clear. But what can we do, and what are the barriers, especially to this topic? And we have done some capacity building activities. We have done a lot of events involving directly in athletes, but most of all, we had a look into the barriers. We realized a useful, I think, very interesting report, going through deep interviews. And so it's not just about survey, but we really had interviews and meetings with a lot of athletes and with a lot of leaders from these 6 countries. So very different from Sweden, because it was still part of the project, to Italy and Poland. So very different situation, because as we know, in Europe, as in the rest of the world, there are huge difference when it comes to leadership, women leadership in sport, diversity in sport. So the environment is very different. So we had a look, and basically we produced a report that it's called "Why We Need Structure to Change." So we already know that structure must be changed in sport. So why we need this structure to change? It was an analysis that show mainly that the problem is a structural problem. So it's a cultural and structural problem. So of course, the solution is not easy, because when the problem is the structure and the environment in general and the cultural in general, the solution cannot be easy, cannot be quick. So we try to have a kind of a mixed approach, has been said before, a holistic approach, which is the only one that can work when it comes to education and culture. And I think that the main findings that I'd like to share with you today is, for example, that most of the women that we have been working with, athletes, they are interested in leadership position. So there is a widespread assumptions that women are not interested in leadership, or they are not prepared for leadership, or they don't want to take on responsibilities and leadership. Well, this is not true, because the 73% of the athletes that we've been talking to, they have tried to take on some leadership position. They have been involved in leadership position. They're interested in being leadership. On the other side, so 73%. On the other side, if you look at the data, Council of Europe data, whatever data, we find that the numbers in the reality of women in leadership position are very low. So the Council of Europe 2019 data is only the 7% of presidents, the 22% of board members, sport federation, and so on. So the reality is that the interest is there, but still the reality is not. And when it comes to why the barriers? So what are the main barriers? So why are these leadership? It's so hard for women to reach leadership position. Again, unsupportive environment is the first answer. So most of the participant women, 43% of the participant women in this survey and in this analysis and in general in all the project show how the unsupportive environment in sport, the lack of recognition, the lack of support by the sport system in general. So we've talked with really every kind of athletes from the very grassroots level to the top level, and this is very common. So there's not much change going from grassroots to top athletes, which is interesting. The first answer is the lack of recognition and support. And I'd like to, when it comes to Europe and difference, I'd like to underline how the general 43% of participants that recognize the lack of supportive environment raised up to a 78% when it comes to Polish women. I just want to underline this because we are going to have our final event very soon in Warsaw, in Poland. And as you all know, the situation for women in Poland is particularly hard, and especially when it comes to inclusive sport or anti-racial sport and inclusive sport in general. And I'd like to just mention one of the women leaders in sport, a Polish coach, women Polish coach. She said, "I believe that the glass ceiling in sport organization is made out of plastic rather than glass. If you keep banging at the glass ceiling, it will break at some point, whereas plastic ceiling just bends." And I think this is an interesting quote because this is what came up from the project. So there is a general awareness that there is this ceiling, but it is still very hard to really reach out some real impact in advancing leadership in sport. So unsupportive environment is the first element that show up, and then I will say there is a problem of narrative. So how women in sport are generally illustrated by media, or the narrative around women in sport. When we interview and we involved in the project both women and men, and it comes out that most of men that we involved, they don't recognize any gender-based discrimination. So there is still a problem of awareness. And when we talk about men, we talk about who decides sport, of course. So we said that most of decision makers are still men. So of course there's a problem of awareness among them. And also most of men that we've been involved in the project, they blame it to the skills, to the competences of the women, and to the lack of interest. And again, this was not what emerging when we talk with women. I think when it comes to the narrative, it's also interesting to underline how many people, both men and girls that we've been working with, they are a bit tired, especially when it comes to football, of the narrative of football environment. So I think one point of recommendation that emerged from the project is to really try to push the women's sport as in terms of new narrative for the sport, a new narrative for the game, because women games, not only football but generally, as being new and being a bit more free, I would say, from all the boundaries and the economic environment that now surround men's sport, or generally sport, can be a little more fresh, can be a little more emotional. So there is a real genuine interest in women game, because it is recognized that it can be something new for the sport. So this is something that maybe we need. Sport organization, social organization, inclusion organization, we really need to understand how to spread this message that women's sport can really upgrade the sport system in general, and maybe change the narrative around this can be also very interesting. Then the intersectionality is another element that came up. And just to mention a few fundings, 1 in 2 women that participate in our project that have been involved in a leadership position have thought about quitting because of all the barriers that we mentioned. When it comes to intersectionality, so women that also have been involved in any kind of other minorities group and face discrimination, it's 2 in 2. So every woman that have some kind of intersectional elements have thought about quitting because of discrimination and the barriers they face. And this brings to another element that we are trying to tackle with the project, which is the lack of effective reporting mechanism for discrimination in sport. As you know, FAIR has a reporting tool, and we have tried to, during the project, we have tried to build on this tool. So there's widespread the use of a tool, some kind of tool of reporting, which is very difficult, of course, because there is a lack of support from sport institutions. There is a lack of confidence in athletes themselves to report any kind of discrimination. So for sure, another element that I feel we need to underline after all the work we've done is that we need some kind of effective reporting mechanism for discrimination. Otherwise, athletes will never feel confident to try themselves to advance in the role of leadership, facing all the discrimination that they face. So just maybe one last, if I can just share the screen for a second, I would like to show you just a website that we have realized. That can you see my screen, everybody? That is stepupequality.jcop.org, and here you can find all the findings and the outputs that we have been realizing during the project. This is the report that I mentioned before. So why we need structure to change, and most of all, this will be we are planning to keep on working on this project. So we are really focused on sustainability now. For example, we have been realizing a training course for athletes on one side, a training course from leaders, and now through one of our partners, Women Win, we'll keep spreading these materials, the toolkit, and everything that we realized through their learning platform, for example. And we would like to reach out and network with all the other organizations working in this field, interested in spread more these materials that we've been using, sharing our materials, because it's good that a lot of organizations are working around leadership. So this is the website that I'd like you to link to, and if you want to know more about the project. So thank you. I give back the word to you, Ben.
Thank you very much indeed, Alice, and for sharing the website as well. That's in the chat if anybody would like it. And I was going to ask what's next, but I think you've just covered that. Step Up Equality kind of becomes sustaining equality, and it's about sharing the tools and the educational messages and so on, and making sure that we continue the conversation around the findings and ultimately implement them. So you can find more details on the website, and as I say, that link is in the chat. But Alice, thank you very much for now, and if you've got any questions for Alice, I should say, you can put that in the chat and our panelists will answer you directly. When we're live, put your questions in the Q&A, which is in the bottom right of the Zoom screen, and then I'll be able to put them directly to our panelists. And that's particularly important when we get onto the round table in about 10 minutes or so. We've got 3 great panelists and about half an hour or so to dive into the topic of moving beyond representation. So think about any of your questions for Priti, Amanda and Violetta. That's coming up very shortly, but before that, let's just get the perspective of FAIR Network, who of course have organised this event, and I am delighted to say that giving some thoughts and presenting on their behalf is the Executive Director of the FAIR Network. It's a very good afternoon to Pierre Power.
Hi Ben, hope you're doing well. It's good to join you here, actually not leave you as the only man in this session. Hello to all of our speakers, thank you for coming along today, and hello to the audience. I haven't got curtains like Ben, but I'm hoping that what I say can animate you as much as his curtains are. I think it's really important, you know, that we reflect on some of the things that have been said already, and some of the contributions that are to come. And this is all within the scope of this project that Alice has presented, Step Up Equality. I think one of the frustrations for many of us will be that whatever the framing of these discussions, however we have these discussions, we have a reoccurring sense of deja vu, that we are talking about the same issues, and we're talking about the same issues year after year after year. So what do we do? How do we progress the issues that are well documented, whether it's within academic research or whether it's within many of us joining this seminar, within our common experiences, our lived experiences. And I often think that there's, one of the challenges that we have at FAIR is to link the perspective of ordinary people who are interested in sport, and particular football, because that's our area of activity. And so linking the grassroots, the action that takes place at grassroots, the frustrations that exist amongst grassroots participants, and then creating a movement actually that also allows us to deal with those issues, but then also allows us to leapfrog into big high level leadership issues, and to deal with issues like sexism and other discrimination, and look at the intersections that exists of race and gender, and sexual orientation and class. So many issues to deal with sometimes, it feels a bit overwhelming. But I'm also an optimist, and I feel actually that my optimism has a base these days, because women's sport is getting a bigger platform than ever before. Women's sport is getting, I think, more investment than ever before. Some of the creative work that's being done by marketeers in football, for example, is really pretty amazing. Both, I mean, we have a lot of disagreements, but as well as working with UEFA and FIFA, but the creative marketeers within both of those organizations, the way in which they're looking to reframe women's sport, sell it out there to new audiences, sign new media deals, get sponsors involved that are very distinct from men's football, I think gives us cause for optimism. Women's football, for example, as with other women's sports, has a long way to go to match male counterparts, to match women's football has a long way to go to match men's football, for example, in terms of the income, in terms of the profile, in terms of the way that it's seen. But some of the things that have happened over the last few years have been really, really good, really encouraging, as I say, really positive, and they certainly give us cause for optimism for the future. One of the issues I think that's a reoccurring one, and Alice touched on it briefly, is the issue of governance. I think very many of us often think that governance is not fit for purpose. And now, whether that is the failure of the governance institutions at national and international level, who are usually run by men, overwhelmingly by men. Amina gave us some data on that. The failure to embrace inclusion, the failure to understand actually that although the women's football is growing, the women's game is growing, but the governance models are the same that exist for men's football. So you have men who are governing women's football. Now, women's football, as I see it, is a very different entity. It's the same sport, same rules, but the direction of travel is very different. It touches people in a different way. There are different dynamics to women's football, and yet we have the same governance structures involving men that are running it. And that's one of the big things I think that we'd like to see. We'd like to see governance generally moving up a gear, becoming more fit for purpose, and people understanding that if you're going to rule the roost when it comes to women's football, then you need to do things differently. And that's aside from all of the diversity arguments and the way in which we know that diversity empowers organizations. And I can give you two examples of some of the practices that we see that we want to see changed. I think the first is the French Football Federation and their ruling that bans hijabis from playing football, effectively bans most young Muslim women in France from playing football, that we heard from Haifa earlier. Their regulations really contradict the FIFA statutes, right? If somebody at FIFA wanted to challenge them and they haven't had the gumption to do it yet, then the French way of looking at women's sport participation, the exclusions that exist, could quite easily be challenged. I think that's a sort of governance change we want to see immediately. And there's no reason why that couldn't happen very quickly. In fact, we raised it with FIFA this morning. And I think most people agree that what happens in France right now in terms of the ban on hijabis playing football is wrong. Another one is an issue that my colleague Brenda Elsey, who's in the chat, I think who's here today, raised. And that was the way in which in some territories, women's football play is such a low priority for the administrators that national team matches are often abandoned days before they're due to be played. Now, we've got a very specific example. I think it was Bolivia versus Bolivia versus the Dominican Republic, which was due to be played in the middle of September. Now, this was an organized national team match, but 2 days before the match was due to be played, the Bolivian FA decided they didn't have the funds to make the match happen. Now, you could never envisage that happening at a national men's team match, even at an under-15s level. It just would not happen. And yet within women's football, it happens. It's something that is quite common in Latin America, actually. So the degrading of women and their participation in sport and their participation in a sport like football, for which FIFA, by the way, is paying them additional sums in order to develop it, is another example of the way in which governance is failing women and women's participation in sport and women's equal representation in sport. One of the big frustrations that I think we have is when we're talking to international governing bodies, particularly at a confederation level, and trying to stress the need for more women to be involved in top leadership positions, the responses we get. And in Europe, even in Western Europe, we have people who say, we agree that women should be more involved in our executive committees, in our executive teams, but that's as far as the conversation goes. The action that should follow then does not follow. So therefore you have the data that Amina presented earlier on, where even at an executive level, women in European football are between 8 and 11% of departmental heads across the leagues, across the elite clubs, the national FAs, and even at UEFA. So this for me is a loss of talent, which is unforgivable. You know, we can see already in the corporate sector in Europe, the role that many women are playing in some of our biggest companies here in Europe. And yet that leadership is not being translated into football. People in football, the current leaders who are male, don't appreciate what women can bring to the table. And that's a real source of frustration. And that's why I think our next panel is going to be so interesting, because I'm interested in some of the things that we're advocating for, what their perspectives are, the need for culture change in football, the need for target setting, for people to say, look, we need a certain percentage of women to be involved from the top down. Ideally, it would be 50%, but that's not going to happen overnight. We need at least something like 20 to 30% of women being involved in executive committees and within organizational structures. How do we bring about the positive change that we need to see? So it'll be really interesting, I think, to hear from Violetta, Priti, and the other panelists, Amanda, for example, who's done an amazing job at FIFA and now has moved to set up a league herself in the US, which I think she'll tell you about. There's so much that needs to be done, but at the same time, as I say before, we're optimistic because we are seeing changes in women's sport, changes in women's football, which even 3 or 4 years ago could not have been envisaged. How do we now balance that sense of reality with the optimism that we feel and the action and the message that needs to be driven forward? So that's all it was for me, just a quick reflection, almost as a kind of bridge between what we've heard so far and what we're going to hear now. I hope I haven't taken too long. Thanks very much for your time, and back to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Piara. I think, as you say, setting targets is so important, and we'll talk about some of the specific targets set in different sectors, leagues and federations in our roundtable in just a moment. And you haven't out-curtained me, but you might have out-bearded me, and it was very engaging hearing your thoughts there. And if you've got any questions for Piara, stick them in the chat. But we are going to move on to the roundtable that he mentioned to try and get you out of here relatively close to 5 o'clock if you're in the UK, of course. And the roundtable that we move on to is going to be really engaging and interactive. We've got 3 leading women's voices from different areas, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But once again, during the panel, please, in the Q&A, bottom right of your Zoom screens, stick in your questions so your voice can be a part of this. And the panelists themselves will be picking up on a number of other discussion topics that we've had over the course of the last 90 minutes or so. And the theme of this roundtable is moving beyond representation. And I'm delighted to say that we are joined by Amanda van der Voort, who, as PR just mentioned, has started a brilliant new job. She is the president of the USL Super League in America and was the head of women's football at FIFPro before that, based out of Amsterdam. Alongside Amanda, we've got Priti Shetty, the non-executive director at Brentford FC. And my team, Leicester, actually managed to beat Brentford only a few weeks ago, but it's a brilliant story seeing Brentford climb into the English Premier League. And the third member of our panel is Violetta Bernsnies, who is the EU Sport Unit member for Belgium. And as I say, we are going to talk about why change is still slow, particularly maybe for ethnic minority women. And is there growing recognition that more women are needed in leadership? And how can we not just move the conversation forward theoretically, but practically as well? So welcome to the three of you. And Amanda, I will start with you. First of all, congratulations on the new job. Tell us a little bit about it, why you chose to move to the USL and some of your aims in this field of gender equality in sport.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And hi, everyone. It's so good to be here. Ben, you've had me, your sense of humor yet seriousness somehow today. It's such a good balance. And you've had me both giggling and like really like down in the depths of gender equality all day. So thanks for being such a great host throughout this entire session. And thanks to FAIR and everyone for having this whole conversation, and in particular this roundtable. I'm really excited to get into it. And thanks for the great intro. Yeah, I was formerly at FIFPro in Amsterdam, which is where I built such a great relationship with FAIR and the folks across Europe. I came back to the United States during COVID. I was actually working remotely for some time. Time zones were definitely challenging, but in about April, I decided, that being in the States was where I was going to build the next phase of my career, and I left FIFPro, and I wasn't really sure where that choice was going to take me, but I had spent a lot of time during COVID actually with a local team in Tucson, Arizona, which is where I was living, called FC Tucson. It's a men's team, professional men's team playing in the USL. And I really got this probably grand appreciation for community soccer and what's really possible through football in local communities through the lens of that team. I've spent my career in leagues and federation and international global policymaking context. So to really feel and live that experience in my hometown was really something special. So I started talking to the league about 6 months ago about their ambitions to build women's professional soccer as part of their ecosystem. In the United States, we have Division I men's professional soccer. I'm just on a video chat. I'll come in just a minute. I'm not sure. Let me real time work here. We have Division I professional soccer in the United States, and the USL occupies the space division sanctioned by US Soccer Federation of Division II and lower, all through professional game to the amateur, which we call pre-professional and academy system. So we have kind of a men's pathway, boys and men's pathway today within the USL ecosystem. And the league came to me about 6 months ago and said, we want to invest, we're already investing on the women's side in the youth, but we want to build a pre-professional, amateur to professional pathway within the American soccer ecosystem that mirrors our men's pathway and our men's league. So what we started talking about was actually this concept of gender equity and how important that is to the development and growth of sport, of soccer, football in this country specifically, and what that would look like on the women's side, what that does look like on the women's side to actually build a league that is based on the same remuneration and standards that we have in our men's professional championship league. And so that's what I came in to build is just that, a women's professional football league that is built on the premise of gender equity and equality here in the United States.
Thank you, Amanda, and good to see that you're multitasking, getting stuff done, and also talking to us as well. So if you need to dive out at any point,
unfortunately, I didn't have the answer for him in the moment because I didn't know how to manage the two things between this and I was actually the CEO of our organization coming in. So but yeah, it's how we do, right? We multitask and we make it happen.
Exactly, there is work to be done. Priti, let me come to you. A very good afternoon. Two questions. The first is, where are you? It looks fantastic, like some kind of castle meets wine cellar meets bachelor pad meets rustic Italian restaurant. And second of all, just elaborate a little bit about what being a non-executive director at Brentford entails day to day for you.
Thanks, Ben. And hi, everybody. I heard about your curtains, and so I decided I needed to be somewhere even more special. I'm in a hotel room in the Netherlands, and it used to be an old army barracks. It's very dark, and I've like positioned lamps all around me to make this better. But yeah, it's not as close to the curtains, but it's not bad. So that's question one. Question two, yeah, I mean, Brentford. So I became a non-exec director at Brentford a couple of months ago, just at the start of us getting promoted. And it's a really interesting one because I started on the process when they were still a championship club, so back in Feb, and we didn't know they were going to get promoted. But my last interview was post getting promoted. And so the last interview was really interesting because it was, was very much around, has anything changed? And obviously lots has changed, but has anything changed in how you'd approach all the things you said you'd approach? Interestingly, Brentford, and I don't particularly know of any other, at least Premier League clubs that have ever done this. They went out to open applications, so anybody could have applied for this role, and it's not something that professional clubs normally do, because your owner picks their directors, right? It's all about trust, and it's all about, who you want alongside you. And Brentford decided a while ago, and they've been on this journey for a while as a club around inclusivity and really wanting to understand what that means. And for them, part of that was, well, if we're going to do it, then we need to do it at the top. And so, advertising openly for a director that they didn't know was a statement. And I didn't know them. And I saw the advert, and, I knew about the club, obviously, and applied because I was able to. And I think that, it links to a lot of what people are saying here around opportunities that are presented to you that wouldn't have been presented otherwise. In its essence, my role as a director, as with any company, is to represent the best interests of the business. And so as a non-exec, I'm independent. And therefore it's ensuring that the business runs well, that we are, in my specific remit, more representative of our community. And I'm also doing lots of work in terms of equality, diversity, and inclusion. But something I love about Brentford is when I got the role, so two of us got the role, and when I got the role, they said, yeah, all of those things that we put in the job description, but actually you have all these other skills, because for your day job, you work in data and tech, and actually it would be really silly not to use these other skills that you have. And so, where do you want to get involved aside from the stuff we've given you? And I love that, because I think often we give people roles and say, here's the role, you have to do that. Whether whether you might have loads of experience there or another interest there, but this is the role, and don't step out of your box. You know what I mean? And I think for me, it's been really rewarding, because the journey so far, and I'm a couple of months in, has been, and where else are you interested? And what else do you want to do? And is there a question you want to ask about this other side of the business that wasn't in the JD, but you have every right to ask?
That's really interesting. It's great that you get to use that broader skill set and kind of shape the strategy from the top down at a leadership level. And I suppose, Violetta, even though the EU sport unit will also be thinking about leadership at a top level, you're also focused on grassroots sport as well. So maybe tell us a little bit about your role and how we can get better representation, not just at leadership level, but at grassroots level too.
Yes, first of all, hello everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to see such a nice panel and be part of it. So I'm from the Commission, so DG Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, and I'm here in my office, and it's also dark outside. And in the sport unit here in the European Commission, what we deal with, like you rightly mentioned, we deal with the sport policy, we deal with sport programs, with the program supporting actually sport, which is through Erasmus Plus mainly, and we work with the stakeholders, and we work obviously with the member states in order to promote, to raise awareness, in order to develop recommendations or different kind of conclusions together with the council that the member states could follow up afterwards, and could also work together in order to get to the target that we in the EU level want to reach, but also with having kind of this mutual learning exercise, and with kind of awareness raising among all the stakeholders that are involved on the different levels. So it's not only like what you mentioned, the EU level, where we here, the sports owners, represent the EU, and the European Commission is there in front, but it also works with the different stakeholders at national level, and of course with the grassroots sports. So what we can do at the EU level is we could, through the EU Work Plan for Sport, which is now from 2021 to 2020, from 2021 to 2024, we have a kind of a key element, which is one of the key priorities, which is gender equality. So in my role here, I am trying to push the file through and put a lot of importance to the gender equality field in the field of sport, but in general also in the Commission as such. I think this is one of the priorities of the von der Leyen's Commission when we are trying to put the union of there's a lot that has been done, but we know that there's still so much that has to be done. Okay, and especially in the women leadership positions. So we are mainstreaming here, trying to work with the stakeholders at the sport level, but also working together with the different other policies in the EU and other director generals that are dealing with policies on employment, on justice, in order to make sure that we all work at reaching the same target. And this is basically the European Union, which is striving for gender equality. So that's the main task that we're doing here in the sports unit.
Really interesting, Violetta, and thank you for that overview. Don't forget, if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A so we can have your voice as part of this. But let's dive into some specifics now. Amanda, I'll start with you. What are some of the advantages on the representation side of building and launching a brand new league? I'm sure that your experience allows you to lean on other leagues and learn from them. But when you're starting from scratch, is that a positive or a negative?
I think, I don't know that I would say it's a positive or a negative. I mean, it's an opportunity, right? So it is an opportunity, to your point, to learn, the mistakes that have happened over time, or the challenges, we've suffered in the women's game, but also, take advantage of the successes and learnings that we've had. But I wouldn't take away from the growth and development of the game, of the women's game in particular, that we've seen over the past 10, 20 years. I think that acknowledging that is so important, and the work of all the people who've been involved in the game has led us to this point. So, whether it's certainly a positive that we're in this place, and we are launching the USL Super League in 2023. So there are now 18 months or so before we kick off. So that gives us the time to build an effective league, appropriate structures, solve for some systemic developments and policy work that needs to be laid before we launch, before we kick the first football in this league. And that gives us a bit of a runway and an opportunity to do that. But I mean, 18 months is really short. What I will say in I think broadly in football, what we do want to address through the development of this league, and in the United States in particular, we have a really strong collegiate system, right? There's about 10,000 women playing Division I college soccer, something like 40,000 across all of our NCAA collegiate divisions in America today. And when they're done with their college careers, there's only one professional, there's 10 professional teams to go play at. That's maybe 300 jobs, right? For women to stay as professional players. And then, you add staff and other opportunities. But, our ambition is to at least double that in our inaugural year and have at least 10 to 12 more teams playing professionally in this country, to give women the opportunity to stay in the game beyond their collegiate playing career in the United States. And hopefully retain talent that might otherwise go to countries, around the world, and now give them the opportunity here. As well as provide opportunities for players at national team level around the world to come and experience the professional football in the United States as well. So I think it's broadly the opportunity to professionalize the women's football industry. And that, as I just described, creating a place where players want to play at the professional level, but it also creates opportunity for coaches and executives and staff to develop their careers in professional sport where these opportunities just literally didn't exist today. The last thing I'll add about the opportunity is that we are operating within an environment, an ecosystem that has a proven men's structure and infrastructure, like system. So for us, the idea of sustainability over the next 10 years isn't a question. Like we're actually quite confident because we have 80 people that work here at the league office already, right? I've got stadiums across the country. I've got infrastructure. I've got an entire ecosystem. We're in 140 communities across this country with 40 odd, Division II professional men's teams already. And the discussion among our ownership, our leadership, our executives is nothing but excitement and commitment to what we've, what we've projected, what we've put in place. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time, and I think it's an opportunity that lies ahead of us. But we're quite we want to recognize the work that has gone into developing and creating the entire football ecosystem around the world to put us in, with the opportunity to have right now. Either I'm on mute.
You're mute, Ben.
Probably a good thing that I'm on mute. It was such a good question, though. I guess I'll repeat it anyway. Pretty, it was to you. I don't know whether you lip readed any of it, but I'll start again. By the way, as I said right at the beginning, if you speak when you are muted in any kind of event, you are supposed to drink, but it's still a little bit early in the day within the United Kingdom to do that. But what I was saying, Pretty, is that there is a structure in the US, and with that structure comes a form of stability, in the sense, if you're a female footballer looking to get into the sport, you can go into the collegiate system, then you can join a professional franchise, and within the leagues of all soccer, they're franchises, and that word can be debated, but ultimately it means that the franchise can't go up or down. In the UK, in men and women's sport, it's the exact opposite. You tend to have to pick football over the traditional education route, and then your team can go from the top to the bottom, or vice versa. Do you think with women in particular, at any level, whether they're aspiring to be leaders or professional footballers or coaches, that lack of structure might be putting them off entering? And how can we get a higher volume of females, whether they're athletes or potential leaders, into football? Is it the lack of that stability? Is it the lack of pay? Is it the lack of pathways? What do you think some of the challenges are stopping higher volumes of women getting into football in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above, right? Like, you know, the issue is, and you're sort of told that there are only certain jobs in football, and one of them is be a player, and you have to be really good, and only 1% of them will make it anyway. And in women's football, even if you make it, that doesn't mean that that's a career. And so that it's not necessarily an attractive pathway. If you aren't any good at football, like me, I'm terrible. I have zero interest in playing. You know, it's not like these roles are advertised. There's no one telling you, oh, there's all of these great roles you could do. They're well paid and you'll get promoted and you will be welcomed. And, you know, there won't be any additional barriers, right? And I think people look at this, and unless you're, you know, for me, I fell into it. And I think a lot of people I've spoken to either were part of the game in some way at a grassroots level and worked their way up and then got stuck a lot of times, or they fell into it and realized, well, actually, they could be a career. It's just so much harder. And why do you want to put yourself through that? And it sort of feels like there isn't a clear pathway to, you know, what success looks like. And unless we see that over and over again, unless those structures exist at every single level, right? And this isn't just women's football. We see this in men's football too. What happens if you don't make it? What happens if you get a job and then you don't progress and you don't move, or you're exposed to other barriers, right? What if you're discriminated against? Where do you go? What most people do is they exit, because how long are you going to keep doing this? And they go, you know what, I'll go get a law degree, or I'll go work in that office there, or I'll do something else where maybe I'll feel more welcome. So yes, I think it's structural 100%, but I think we need to invest in these pathways. I feel like we can't just sit there and keep saying, oh, there's not enough women, there's not enough women. Well, what are we doing about it? And how are we showing them that these pathways exist? And so this is attractive. It is attractive for you to make it professionally. It is attractive for you to be the CEO and start something new. It's attractive for you to, work in the marketing department of a football club or run a federation. Right now, and it's 2021, it still doesn't feel that attractive. You're still often the first or the only, and that in itself is a bit of a blocker.
And Violetta, the EU will naturally sit on that intersect between sport and policy. And to Pritti's point about getting more representation and every female voice at leadership level coming through, not feeling like they have to be the pioneer and they are the first. How can kind of policy across sport and across Europe help us get to a place where representation is more balanced between the sexes? Are you in favor, for example, of quotas, or does that border on something that's too tokenistic?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because it's indeed, it's a big barrier, and it's not enough that we only talk about that. It's also very necessary to talk about that and to make every and each level stakeholder aware of this, and encourage women participation in general in sport, and especially in the leadership positions. But from the EU point of view, what we can do, obviously our mandate in a way is limited. We cannot, being here in the Commission dealing with the sport policy, impose certain regulations like other policies can do on the EU level. However, we still have a lot of tools that we have in our hands that can influence and make things better. For example, now we're running this year the high-level group on gender equality in sport, and I see that there's also an honorable chair, Emin Bozkurt, among the panelist attendees of this meeting, and I find it myself as an excellent example of how we can first of all come up with the recommendations and the complete action plan and it's going to be soon actually, then when these recommendations will be published, and it will address various levels. So it will address the EU level, it will address the member states level, and also the sport movement as such. So everyone with whom we have to talk to. And there will be concrete action plans. And one of those topics that we're covering in this group is especially this women in leadership positions. So I'm very much looking forward to the result of what this group will bring. And this group consists of former athletes, of the presidents of the federations, of former MEP. I'm really, I think that this will be something that we will be able to put as a kind of a structural framework in the EU that could help in various layers to improve the situation. So I believe the EU can do a lot with these role models, with maybe what the targets. You asked about the targets. I mean, we would like to set up, and I think that we could certainly try to suggest a certain quota, because that's something that you know, we know from the data, we know from the surveys, we know how bad the situation is, and how much or few women are in the decision-making positions. So I mean, when we have concrete targets, indicators, it's obviously much easier to measure it afterwards also, you see. So let's see, let's wait, and let's see how these recommendations and this concrete action plan will end up. And I'm sure that this is going to be a good example that we as the EU, as working together with other also, you know, sport federations and organizations and movements and grassroots, we can make everything better. So
if we look, Amanda, at practical things we can do to get more representation, do you think one of them is not keep tying everything, whether it's men versus women in representation or other areas, back to the male game, back to the male model? Because the male model of football at elite level anyway has systematic problems, whether it's representation, whether it's financial. And if we look at the women's game, even though we don't want to be saying women's football, men's football, we want to just be saying football. But if we look at what women's football is doing, many of the leagues, the WSL, your new USL league, parts of the NWSL, despite the recent scandal, what we're seeing is a lot more tangible, practical steps towards representation at all levels between the sexes, but also with the BAME community, with the LGBTQ plus community, and so on. So should we be inverting things a little bit, and instead of trying to just get more women into elite level football and the men's game, should we be looking at different women's leagues and why the structure of them is more inclusive, is more representative, is more authentic, and actually taking things, even if those leagues are smaller, from those women's leagues and trying to amplify them across world football? And could that be a solution to get representation quicker and in a more authentic way?
Oh, it's an interesting idea, Ben. I think you almost answered your question there, right? I think it's a cool opportunity for sure to learn from the women's game in its own right, and what women bring to the game as you know, as an independent look at, you know, an independent look at the game, certainly separate from the men's structures and systems. I think that you know, I think that's powerful to consider. You know, I often say, like, we play the same sport, but we operate in different industries. And I think that I think when we look at the governance structures, when we look at competition frameworks, when we look at even just the people who work in women's football and men's football, they're different human beings that you're working with different ideas and structures. And so I think having conversations about the women's game with people that work in the women's game, and then taking those learnings and applying them. But the trick is you have to have people who, like, I've worked in the men's game for 10 years, men's professional soccer here in America for 10 years at Major League Soccer. And then I went into the women's game, and I could take the learnings from men's football over to the women's game and vice versa. But a lot of times as a woman, I find the initial assumption is that I work in women's football because I'm a woman. And so I think getting more women into leadership in men's football is a conversation that we need to have, as well as moving from one side of the game to the other. Like, I think that's a real value, so that we can take those learnings and not assume that if you're a man, you work in men's football, or if you're a woman, you work in women's football, but actually, how can we build bridges and understanding between the two without legislating the same, right? It's a look at equity and how valuable equity is to the conversation, not necessarily saying we do things the exact same because that's how we've always done them. And I think in my career, I think I've been fortunate, both when I was at FIFPro, the general secretary, Jonas Bear Hoffman. I think, he really took this concept of equality and equity really seriously, and instituted mandates at the board level across the FIFPro ecosystem and the boards for women and diversity within the board structure as a first step, I think, towards achieving balance in the boardroom and decision making. And so I've been fortunate to work with him through that process. And I'd say the same thing here at the USL. Our CEO, Alec Papadakis, and the leadership team at the USL, are men who believe in gender equity and believe in equality, and that we need to create change. We need to hire women. We need to build. We need to build from the ground up, but also create opportunities for executives and board members at the senior most level, so that when they enter the conversation, they bring that diverse background and experience and can help move the needle on how we frame decision making.
We've got probably 10 to 15 minutes left. I'm going to come to you, Priti, in a moment. You may want to come in on this, but let me just put Tosin's point to all of the panelists, and please anybody come in on this, because I said before, my opinion is that aspects of women's football are more inclusive, particularly around the LGBTQ plus community, the accessibility to athletes, the fact that the athletes are activists as well. You can join a football club as a member. At Lewis, for example, I'm an owner, and you can walk out as a mascot, or you can wait around and you can get an autograph afterwards. Those things I think women's football does better. But as a counterpoint, Tosin says the women's leagues are not doing representation well. The lack of black and brown women who leave the game or get ignored in the game over white women fragility is a problem. And I find it, he says, so frustrating that people think the women's game is an inclusive space. So what's your kind of response to that part of feedback from Tosin?
I mean, I think it's good feedback. We need to hear it, and we need to understand how we change and how we evolve and how we listen. I mean, if there's one thing I learned about working in the players union, I was on the executive side of the game for 10, 15 years. And then I went to the player side, and in Europe, which is a much different labor ecosystem than it is in the United States. And I think I spent the good majority of my time listening to players, listening to perspectives from different communities and what their needs are. And I think I think early in my career, I did a lot of advocacy around women in leadership roles and around women in sport. I sat on a bunch of women's committees. But I think I missed intersectionality in my early career, and the importance of that consideration, and whatever the support mechanisms are, and hiring systems and infrastructure. So it's a critical one for us to address and talk about, and I'll commit myself to that. But it's it's about getting voices in the room to help guide that. And what that looks like.
Priti or Violetta, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, it's, first of all, we need more Amandas in the room, right? Because, and this is the same whether we talk about gender equality or we talk about racism. It's not one group's problem to solve. It is not Black or brown people's issue for us to solve alone. It's not women's issue for us to solve alone. And I don't think it does any good for, if football turned around and said, here you go, a bunch of women, can you sit in a room and figure out the problem to gender equality? That's not how this works. You don't get to put it on us. However, we do want to be consulted, right? For me, the issue that we have a lot of the time, and the intersectionality is exactly the problem, right? We have gotten to a point in this game where it sometimes feels like one or the other. Like I have been at women in, not the organization, but like women's football events where, we've had people say, and, I bring up something about race, for example, and I have had people say, let's cross one bridge at a time, because like this fight is so hard already that the more layers we add, the harder it is for them to understand. And I'm unclear who them is, but the issue with doing that is immediately we're dividing just amongst us, right? So it becomes, let's deal with the women's stuff first. When more women get positions, then we'll look at the color thing, then we'll look at the disability thing, and it doesn't work like that. Like the intersectionality exists, and therefore what we need is to look out for each other and say a working group consultation isn't enough. Give me a seat at the table so I can tell you what my opinion is. And again, I cannot speak for everybody, right? But as long as we're having more of these conversations, and I love what you just said, Amanda, because you have experience of working in men's football, you have experience of being a woman, you are listening to the experiences of a brown woman now, but we're still not the only ones. And the more we come together and talk about this, the more it will be a prompt the next time I have a decision to make to go, hold on, I haven't spoken to anybody. Where is, the people with disabilities? Where are our LGBTQI people? And I think we need to remind ourselves that, because it does sometimes feel like you have one battle, quickly win it, because you won't get the chance again. And I think that is part of this problem.
Violetta, anything you've heard that you want to touch upon?
Much has been said already, but from my point, I'm afraid I won't be able to share particular insights about how it happens on the ground. And I'm happy that we have here Amanda and Preeti that can share their insights, because they know that for sure much better than I do. But what I can say from my side is that I think it's not only the problem in football. It's inclusion and diversity is a priority that we need to tackle on a wider perspective in a different areas, on much higher levels too, not only looking at one particular football club or something else, and from that perspective, what comes to my mind, what we are doing here in the Commission is also to be able to provide opportunities, funding opportunities to various to the people with fewer opportunities. So basically, we want to include everyone, and we want to be sure that also those that are with fewer opportunities, whether it's whatever you can call it, even geographically, located somewhere in the far corner of Europe, or would it be gender equality or anything else, or disabilities. I mean, we want to be inclusive, and we want to make sure that everyone has similar opportunities, and particularly here, for example, for to access to funding and to Erasmus Plus program, and being able to have and to go on some exchanges, or to get some funding to run the project. So we here in the EU take it very, very seriously, and we make sure that it's a horizontal priority that is driving and mainstreamed and being incorporated all the different policies in all the different areas.
I'm conscious that we're eating into your valuable time and evenings, but it's a fascinating discussion. So I'm going to do one more round of questions on a different topic, and then we'll wrap things up. But I'm sure all three panelists will be perfectly happy to connect with you individually and continue this debate. Amanda, thumbs up, and Preeti also nodding in what we hope isn't a dungeon and is actually just a nice hotel in Amsterdam, as she says, but feel free to wink at us if you're actually locked in there, and we'll make sure that we get you out of Amsterdam safely. But Priti, let me come to you. Representation can be achieved through leadership at that senior level. We've also mentioned grassroots, but another way of getting representation is marketing. Are we doing enough at marketing? You know, ultimately, women are 51% of the population. Do our football clubs do enough to market to that demographic in order to make sure that they feel like coming to Brentford is a inclusive, fun, safe experience? Buying merchandise is easy, and there's enough of it available in different sizes and fits and cuts and so on. How much more can we do to market to women to make sure that they come to that first football match, they buy a season ticket, and then that ultimately enthuses them to stay in the industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And this is all a big vicious circle. That's really what this is. If the only people in your marketing teams are men, then they don't know how to market to women, right? And that is changing. And actually, marketing is one of the areas where we are seeing more women at football clubs, which is great. But again, a certain kind of woman, perhaps, and you know, are they Asian women? Are they Black women? Are they plus size women? Are they, you know, it's such a, I feel like football marketing is still very traditional in that it's doing one thing. It's like, are we marketing to women as if women are a homogenous group? And we are not. And so, you know, and with the data that's available to us, it's crazy that we aren't doing more. But really, it's you know, it's not a women's marketing strategy. It needs to be a Black women over 50 marketing strategy, a brown woman who's come to London for the first time marketing strategy. You know, we need to segment, but not just our women, we need to segment all our fans, because if you want someone to stay and you want someone to be part of the journey, whether that's getting a job at their local club or buying merch or buying a season ticket, it's all about the experience that you're given. And as soon as you have that first experience, whatever that may be, of they don't have my size, or, oh, it's all men's stuff, or, you know, someone made a sexist remark at the game, or my kids felt unsafe, whatever that bad experience is, as soon as you have one, we go back to that exit. This isn't for me. This isn't for me. I'll go to netball because people love me there. You know what I mean? And we need to get away from that. And part of getting away from that, again, talk to us, talk to people. What would you like to see? At Brentford, we're really trying to do this a lot, right? And it's not, you know, it's our community, but also it's reflective in our food, for example, like the food we serve at the stadium. You know, we try to be as diverse as possible in terms of local restaurants that we have in the area. They have, like, we do samosas before the game. You know, we do stuff for the kids. But again, this isn't and we could also be doing more. We're looking at our merchandise and trying to see whether we're asking questions. Is this enough? Do you like it? What else would you want? It's still not enough because it's still a little bit secondary. We know that we opened a merchandise store a couple of weeks ago and it was crazy. It was packed, and, you know, and with Brentford, who's taking this very seriously, I think even we had to ask the question. We were like, is there enough stuff for women? And they were like, yeah, already thought about it. But we would never ask that question about, would we ever say, is there enough men's stuff in the merchandise store? It would never even be a thing. And I think that's where we need to get to, is, as with any marketing, we need to move with the times and recognizing that women are consumers and therefore a big part of your revenue stream. Are you asking the right questions? Are you asking the right people? And is it not an afterthought? Unmute, Ben.
Second time, it's criminal to do it twice. Once is excusable, twice I deserve to be sacked. And thankfully, you've only got about 5 more minutes of me anyway. Amanda, marketing is no doubt an area that you want to touch upon, so feel free to kind of respond to what Priti said. And then I'd like you to move on as well to kind of target setting. So when we have these conversations, we often speak so broadly and we get into so many areas, and there is much work to be done. But it's also important as a league to put very specific, tangible targets to see whether you are making progress. And I say that because the FA today have released their latest women's football strategy. It was actually embargoed until 5 p.m. in the UK, but that's available, and it's been led by Kelly Simmons for anyone to read on their website. But their targets include things like average attendance going up, the digital followings improving, selling out Wembley Stadium, more partnerships. And then at the bottom, there's a range of other ones like percentage of players transitioning from academies, percentage increasing in player progression measures, percentage increasing in the number of players from the most deprived wards in the country. And the former ones have all got progress and targets. The latter ones have all just got question marks and TBCs by them. So, feel free, first of all, to respond to the kind of marketing thing, but then maybe give me like that broad overview of what targets do you think are helpful for leagues, federations, and so on to set, and how will those targets help us make progress in this field of representation?
Well, I spent 10 years in marketing men's professional soccer, and you've given me 2 minutes. So I'll be super brief. I'm a growth marketer. I'm a needs-based growth marketer. I believe that it's about identifying what are the needs of your fans and delivering on that. So yeah, of course, we need to ask questions. Like, I think that's a great starting point, but then organizing the responses in a way that we can address collectively. So when I started talking to the USL about launching a women's professional league, it wasn't just about bringing a women's professional league to the table. It was about addressing both female fans of the men's game and also new fans that we bring in through the women's game to grow the collective organization that is the USL. Because Piara earlier in his session was talking about actually I think it was Piara, bringing the women's game is actually going to improve the collective and the men's game as well. So, I think about marketing, at least in this context, kind of as a holistic approach, but specifically segmenting what are the needs of consumers of the women's game, and understanding who are those consumers and what are they looking for in terms of their experience in football. So we could talk about marketing. Can we sign up another session to talk about marketing? I would love that. Regarding quotas, first of all, well done, Kelly. If you see this, if you hear from, congratulations on getting that out. That's awesome. I can't wait to read it, which I'm gonna go find on the internet right now, or maybe if it's online, you can, Ben, I don't know if we can pop it into the old questions here so that everyone can access it. That'd be amazing. Listen, you got to have targets to shoot for, right? And whether that's KPIs that Kelly and the FA have set out, ours might look different here in the United States, but certainly being able to hold yourself accountable to a certain set of standards is, I think, critical to any business. And that's what this is. It's a business, right? We need to drive, we need to drive revenue, hence the marketing discussion. We need to drive awareness, access, and opportunity, and kind of everything in between. So certainly setting targets as they apply to participation through to broadcast deals is a critical piece of a successful, footballing ecosystem. And so big big celebration to them for getting that over the line. But of course, I think, as a community, holding them accountable to those KPIs that they have set, and doing the same when we put ours forward, right? Holding us accountable as well. I hope that the community is that engaged and inspired by what we're building, that they want to know our progress along the way.
So in the chat is a very, very long link of numbers and percentages, but if you click on it, I promise you it's not going to infect your computer. That's the link to the brand new FA Women's strategy. So everyone have a read of that, and hopefully offline we can continue that discussion. Violet, I'm going to give the final word to you. From the perspective of the EU Sport Unit, how do you judge your progress in terms of tangible KPIs? What's kind of out there either now or over the coming years that will be judging progress for representation based upon?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because what I said before, in my view, it is really important to put some tangible targets so that we can measure afterwards the progress That's essential. What we have done already in the field of gender equality, as the Commission as such, I think it's already something that we can talk about, and there has been done a lot on equal treatment legislation, on gender mainstreaming, on specific measures for the advancement of women, but obviously there's still a lot to do. If we look at the gender equality strategy of the Commission, and I'm talking about that because it's, as we discussed, the mainstreaming is important. So it's important that the sport is mainstreamed in the gender equality strategy, and it does have a notion there, and there is an aim and a target to set up kind of a strategic framework for gender equality in the field of sport, and we're building it with the help of the high-level group and recommendations and action plans. Well, we could look at the specific targets that we have at the gender equality strategy for the whole EU, and then we could look at the specific actions and recommendations that will come up after this high-level group is finished and after we have these recommendations proposed. And I already know that there will be some specific targets, and we should stick to that. We should make sure that it's not only like a document, a recommendation that people will probably, you know, read diagonally through, but that it's really mainstreamed, and we discuss this in various levels with various stakeholders and various events that we in the Commission that we're organizing together with member states, but also, you know, in the sports movement, in the events like this, in the events which are really grassroots level, so that everyone is aware of kind of their role, how they can play in order to improve the situation that we have now in gender equality, and in order to really look, okay, where do I fit? Because these recommendations are really like with the specific actions to the member states, to the Commission as such, and to the sports movement themselves. So with the specific targets that will appear there. So I'm really looking forward to having this, you know, next year, broad discussions about these topics, and commitment from everyone, from all the levels, to work on it together. And I don't want to say, I don't know, in some years, or don't want to put that time limit, because obviously we want things happen soon and fast. But yeah, that we look back at some point from now and we say, okay, we did it, and we did it together.
Great stuff, Violetta. Thank you for that. It's a good way to close. My thanks also to Amanda and Priti as well. Good luck for the rest of the season to Brentford, apart from when you play Leicester in the return leg. And Amanda, of course, best of luck as the new league grows and launches. Really excited to come and see that. And Violetta, keep up the good work as well over at the EU. But we'll wrap things up there. And my apologies that we've overrun slightly. It's mostly because I've been rambling on about my curtains and leaving myself on mute, eating up valuable time. But what I do want to do before we end this session is just recap some of the key learnings. The session, of course, was entitled Step Up Equality and was about women's leadership in sport. And we began with an overview, a keynote from Amin, who is the chair of the EU high-level group on gender equality in sport. And she told us about some of their aims and the issues facing women in sport, and some of those conclusions will be available online. And then we moved on to more practical things. It's really important when talking about representation to think about things in practical terms, i.e., how can we actually get things done? The conversation about the theoreticals and the strategy is valuable because we need to steer things in the right direction, but then you've actually got to do things. And to do that, we learned from Michelle Dorgan at Women in Football that building partnerships is important, and Get On Side launched about a month ago. So please do check that out, because it's a way that you can actually tangibly get involved. In other words, you can pledge something and then facilitate it, ideate it from start to finish. So then you're not just lending your support, you're actually lending a partnership that's going to practically get something done. And that's really important. And then Haifa told us about the importance of intersectional feminism and showed us a couple of really interesting slides, which she can share with you. And then we heard from Alice and Piara, who both made valuable points. Alice from the perspective of Gia in Italy, and those project findings are crucial because we need to sustain that project now that the report findings have been published. And then Piara, of course, gave us the overview from the perspective of the FAIR network as well. And then I think what we learned in the round table is that we have to attack representation from lots of different levels. It's not just top down or bottom up, and it's not just about integrating women into men's sport. It's about looking at football as just a sport that is collective and unified. And then it's also realizing that it's not just women, it's different kinds of women from various demographics. And there's lots of crossover in the sphere, therefore, of inclusion rather than only focusing on gender equality. So my thanks to everybody for inputting. And I'm just going to finish up by reminding you of FAIR's social network handles as well, so you can follow them and get involved. And that is FAIRNet, FARENET, all one word, and you can follow us across social media. So please, let's keep the conversation going, but let's also make sure that we do that in a practical sense. So we're backing things, we're doing things, we're being active in a way where tangible change will happen rather than just talking about it in a more tokenistic way. So thanks for joining us, and looking forward to more conversations through FAIR and also networking offline as well. Let's keep this really important conversation going, and let's all make progress together. But from myself, Ben Jacobs, and from everybody at FAIR, thank you for joining us. So sorry that we've overrun slightly, and have yourselves a great evening. And now we have the awkward silence as everybody just goes offline, slowly but surely. Enjoy the rest of your week, everybody.
Great job,
Thanks,
Ben.
Ben. Take care. Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Bye.